Okay, as we read these next poems, I want you to think about what love is, because we're going to enter into Romeo and Juliet. And those two were very, very young. And so are you guys. And so I want you to be thinking about love, what love is and what love isn't. The first poem that we're going to read is To My Dear and Loving Husband. Now, this one was written in 1678 by Anne Bradstreet. She's credited with being the first basically American poet. It says Anne Bradstreet, her maiden name was Dudley. That's what that knee means. 1612 to 1672, was the most famous of early English poets in her time and the first published female writer in the British North American colonies. Addressed to Bradstreet's husband, that means she's speaking to her husband in this poem. The poem depicts the intimacy of a couple deeply in love. As you read, take notes on the structure and themes of the piece. How does the narrator describe their relationship? If ever two were one, then surely we. If ever man were loved by wife, then thee. If ever wife was happy in a man, compare with me, ye women, if you can. I prize thy love more than whole mines of gold, or all the riches that the east doth hold. My love is such that rivers cannot quench, nor aught but love from thee give recompense. Thy love is such I can no way repay. The heavens reward thee manifold, I pray. Then while we live in love, let's so persevere that when we live no more, we may live ever. And of course, they were very religious Puritans, and that would be the eternal kind of love she wanted in heaven. The next poem we're going to read is in a little contrast to that. Let's see, What Love Isn't. Now, this one is contemporary, 2014, and I regret that I don't know how to pronounce the name, Ursa Dailey-Ward. It says, Ursa Dailey-Ward is a spoken word poet, self-published author, and actress of Jamaican and Nigerian heritage. In this poem, Ward uses figurative language to explore what love is and is not. As you read, take note of how the poet uses figurative language, similes, metaphors, personification, to describe love and the effect it has on the overall theme, the meaning behind the poem. This is a photo called Us. Line 1. It is not a 5-star stay. It is not compliments, and it is never, ever flattery. It is solid, not sweet, but always nutritious, always herb, always salt, sometimes grit. It is now until the end. It is never a slither, never a little. It is a full serving. It is much, too much and real, never pretty or clean. It stinks. You can smell it coming. It is weight. It is weight, and it is too heavy to feel good sometimes. It is discomfort. It is not what the films say. Only songs get it right. It is irregular. It is difficult and always, always surprising. You can tell that one's contemporary, can't you? Okay. And Love Song with Two Goldfish by Grace Chow. And I'm afraid I messed her name up too. Grace Chow is an award-winning journalist whose work usually deals with science and the environment. In this poem, Chow explores the love between two goldfish living in a fishbowl. As you read, take of uh, note of on the use of puns throughout the poem and their multiple meanings. And notice the parentheses also. This one's just titled Goldfish. Okay? He's a drifter, always floating around her, has nowhere else to go. He wishes she would sing. Not much, just the scales. Or take some notice, give him the fish eye. Bounded by round walls, she makes fish eyes and kissy lips at him, darts behind pebbles, swallows his charms, hook, line, and sinker. He's bowled over. He would take her to the ocean. They could count the waves. There, in the submarine silence, they would share their deepest secrets, dive for pearls like stars. But her love's since gone belly up. His heart sinks like a fish. He drinks like a stone, drowns those sorrows, stares emptily through glass. The reason she said she wanted and he could not give a life beyond the bowl. That one is pretty funny and it provokes a lot of thought. So be thinking about those double meanings. You know, he's a drifter, and we know a drifter, person who is continually moving from place to place. And of course, fish just drift through the water. He has nowhere else to go because they live in a fishbowl, of course. Sing just the scales. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Fish scales. Give him the fish eye. Usually fish eye, giving somebody the fish eye isn't a very good thing. But here, he wants her fish eyes. Bounded by round walls. The fish eyes and the kissy lips. She swallows his charms. Hook, line, and sinker. If you swallow something hook, line, and sinker, you believe it wholeheartedly. He's bowled over. They're in a fish bowl. He would take her to the ocean. You know, they would count the waves. How do I love thee? I'm sure that's an allusion to how do I love thee? Let me count the waves. Love thee to the depths. Okay. They're in the submarine silence where it's really dark and they're all alone. Share their deepest secrets, deepest down below and deep in the ocean. Dive for pearls like stars. But going belly up, fish die, they go belly up. His heart sinks like a fish. You sink like a stone and you drink like a fish. And here Chow has reversed those. His heart sinks like a stone and he drinks like a stone. Little irony there. Drowns his sorrows. That means you drink a lot of alcohol. But of course, fish don't have access to alcohol. Stares emptily through the glass, and you think an empty, maybe mug of beer, but he's looking through the bowl. The reason she said she wanted and he could not give a life beyond the bowl. So what do we want when we're in love? We want so much, and we often want things the other person just can't provide. So those are your poems. And then we have a short story. I've got our other short story on a different YouTube video by Guy de Maupassant. Was It a Dream? Here I'm going to read A Respectable Woman by Kate Chopin. Now, Chopin's one of my favorite authors. She wrote this before, 1900. In 1894, she was very liberal during an age. Feminism was a big deal. Chopin, so be thinking about that. Kate Chopin, 1850 to 1904, was an American author of short stories and novels based in Louisiana. She is considered one of the leading feminist writers of the 20th century. This story begins with a married woman's disappointment over the visit of her husband's friend. As you read, take notes on how Mrs. Baroda's feelings develop over the course of the text. Mrs. Baroda was a little provoked to learn that her husband expected his friend's Governale to spend a week or two on the plantation. So you can assume this is in the South. They had entertained a good deal during the winter. Much of the time had also been passed in New Orleans in various forms of mild dissipation. She was looking forward to a period of unbroken rest now, and undisturbed tete-a-tete, a little head-to-head with her husband, when he informed her that Governale was coming up to stay a week or two. This was a man she had heard much of but never seen. He had been her husband's college friend, was now a journalist, and in no sense a society man or a man about town, which were perhaps some of the reasons she had never met him. But she had unconsciously formed an image of him in her mind. She pictured him tall, slim, cynical, with eyeglasses and his hands in his pockets, and she did not like him. Gouvernail was slim enough, but he wasn't very tall nor very cynical. Neither did he wear eyeglasses nor carry his hands in his pockets, and she rather liked him when he first presented himself. But why she liked him she could not explain satisfactorily to herself. When she partly attempted to do so, she could discover in him none of those brilliant and promising traits which Gaston, her husband, had often assured her that he possessed. On the contrary, he sat rather mute and receptive before her chatty eagerness to make him feel at home, and in the face of Gaston's frank and wordy hospitality, his manner was as courteous toward her as the most exacting woman could require, but he made no direct appeal to her approval or even esteem. Once settled at the plantation, he seemed to like to sit upon the wide portico in the shade of one of the big Corinthian pillars, smoking his cigar lazily and listening attentively to Gaston's experience as a sugar planter. "This is what I call living," he would utter with deep satisfaction as the air that swept across the sugar field caressed him with its warm and scented velvety touch. It pleased him also to get on familiar terms with the big dogs that came about him, rubbing themselves sociably against his legs. He did not care to fish, and displayed no eagerness to go out and kill grosbecs when Gaston proposed doing so. Gouvernail's personality puzzled Mrs. Baroda, but she liked him. Indeed, he was a lovable, inoffensive fellow. After a few days, when she could understand him no better than at first, she gave over being puzzled and remained piqued, a little irritated. In this mood, she left her husband and her guest, for the most part, alone together. Then, finding that Gouvernail took no manner of exception to her action, she imposed her society upon him, accompanying him in his idle strolls to the mill and walks along the Betuwe. She persistently sought to penetrate the reserve in which he had unconsciously enveloped himself. "When is he going, your friend?" she one day asked her husband. "For my part, he tires me frightfully." "Not for a week yet, dear. I can't understand. He gives you no trouble." "No, I should like him better if he did. If he were more like others, and I had to plan somewhat for his comfort and enjoyment." I think she's used to men fussing over her. Gaston took his wife's pretty face between his hands and looked tenderly and laughingly into her troubled eyes. They were making a bit of toilette sociably together in Mrs. Baroda's dressing room. Toilette means they were getting ready, like at the dressing table in the bathroom. "You were full of surprises, ma belle," he said to her. Now, so you can see all the French influence in this story. He said to her, so they're probably Southern French planters. He said to her, "Even I can never count upon how you are going to act under given conditions." He kissed her and turned to fasten his cravat before the mirror. "Here you are," he went on, "taking poor Gouvernail seriously and making a commotion over him, and the last thing he would desire or expect." "Commotion?" she hotly resented. "Nonsense! How can you say such a thing? Commotion indeed! But you said he was clever." "So he is, but the poor fellow is run down by overwork now. That's why I asked him here to take a rest." "You used to say he was a man of ideas," she retorted, unconciliated. "I expected him to be interesting at least. I'm going to the city in the morning to have my spring gowns fitted. Let me know when Mr. Gouvernail is gone. I shall be at my Aunt Octavie's." That night she went and sat alone upon a bench that stood beneath a live oak tree at the edge of the gravel walk. She had never known her thoughts or her intentions to be so confused. She could gather nothing from them but the feeling of a distinct necessity to quit her home in the morning. Mrs. Baroda heard footsteps crunching the gravel, but could discern in the darkness only the approaching red point of a lighted cigar. She knew it was Gouvernail, for her husband did not smoke. She hoped to remain unnoticed, but her white gown revealed her to him. He threw away his cigar and seated himself upon the bench beside her, without a suspicion that she might object to his presence. "Your husband told me to bring this to you, Mrs. Baroda," he said, handing her a filmy white scarf with which she sometimes enveloped her head and shoulders. She accepted the scarf from him with a murmur of thanks and let it lie in her lap. He made some commonplace observation upon the baneful effect of the night air at that season. Then, as his gaze reached out into the darkness, he murmured half to himself, "Night of south winds, night of the large few stars, still nodding night." Now, this is a piece from Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman, which was during that time probably romance poetry. It was said that Bill Clinton liked to give that as a gift, the collection Leaves of Grass, to girlfriends, even Hillary when he was dating her. She made no reply to this apostrophe to the night. An apostrophe, a literary device where you speak to something that can't respond, someone who's not present, or to an inanimate object. This apostrophe to the night, which indeed was not addressed to her. Gouvernail was in no sense a diffident man, for he was not a self-conscious one. His periods of reserve were not constitutional, but the result of moods. Sitting there beside Mrs. Baroda, his silence melted for the time. He talked freely and intimately in a low, hesitating drawl that was not unpleasant. This is an example of lightities that was not unpleasant to hear. So means she did hear. It's an understatement, which she was enjoying to listen to him. He talked of the old college days when he and Gaston had been a good deal to each other, of the days of keen and blind ambitions and large intentions. Now there was left with him, at least, a philosophic acquiescence or a giving in to the existing order, only a desire to be permitted to exist, with now and then a little whiff of genuine life such as he was breathing now. Her mind only vaguely grasped what he was saying. Her physical being was for the moment predominant. She's feeling physical sensations predominant. She was not thinking of his words, only drinking in the tones of his voice. She wanted to reach out her hand in the darkness and touch him with the sensitive tips of her fingers upon the face or the lips. She wanted to draw close to him and whisper against his cheek. She did not care what, as she might have done if she had not been a respectable woman. Respectable women don't do that kind of thing. The stronger the impulse grew to bring herself near him, the further, in fact, did she draw away from him. As soon as she could do so without an appearance of too great rudeness, she rose and left him there alone. Before she reached the house, Gouvernail had lighted a fresh cigar and ended his apostrophe to the night. Mrs. Baroda was greatly tempted that night to tell her husband, who was also her friend, of this folly, and look what folly means, foolishness, that had seized her, but she did not yield to the temptation, so she did not tell her husband. Besides being a respectable woman, she was a very sensible one, and she knew there are some battles in life which a human being must fight alone. So you have to ask yourself, what battle is she fighting here? When Gaston arose in the morning, his wife had already departed. She had taken an early morning train to the city. She did not return till Gouvernail was gone from under her roof. There was some talk of having him back during the summer that followed. That is, Gaston greatly desired it, but this desire yielded to his wife's strenuous opposition. Like, no. She knew that could be trouble for her. However, before the year ended, she proposed wholly from herself to have Gouvernail visit them again. Her husband was surprised and delighted with the suggestion coming from her. I am glad, cher ami, to know that you have finally overcome your dislike for him. Truly, he did not deserve it. Oh, or did he? Gaston doesn't understand. Oh, she told him laughingly, after pressing a long, tender kiss upon his lips. I have overcome everything. Oh, you will see. This time I shall be very nice to him. Oh, dun, dun, dun. Has she overcome being a respectable woman, I wonder? You just can only infer. Okay, well, that ends our little reading of these particular poems and stories, and you need to gather evidence about what you think love is and how it affects us.